You so much, Tyler. Thank you, Writers and Books, for having me. Thank you, Leo, for the conversation that we're going to have. And thank you all for being here. It's a hopefully not too sweltering July day, and hopefully we'll get some fun poems to enjoy. But yeah, I'm here to talk about Scream Queen, my poetry collection that's almost 4 months old now at this point, which is pretty wild. But just something to know about the collection is it navigates questions of gender, sexuality, queerness, the body through the lens of horror films, how we define monsters, what it means to be marked as a monster, and what it means to feel empowered in that sense also. So I'm going to read some poems that are spooky but not too scary. The first poem I'm going to read is called On Witchcraft. Statues of Hecate show a triple-headed goddess, a being far too myriad for just one mouth. There's a longing for what's lost in shrines, engraved into a frieze, that's held inside a myth. My sibling knew defiance early on. Their buzz cuts, constant binder, new name at the bank, and license photo. F walks through forests, filling clearings with their beard. Shows how to curse a compromise, pull the moon down with both hands. Just how enclosures took the peasantry from commons, witch hunts took the women from their bodies. I gleaned from Federici. I want to be the open field and commune, the strength that would provide, to coven in a word like them and reclaim multitude as gender. In cinema, the witch ends as stubbled sisters levitate through pines, their chorus, glaiby night. I order my capri pants, scroll through rows of summer dresses, text photos to a friend, and hope to find my Sabbath field. Reach out from disenchantment, still unsure of what to grasp. I scour terms for remedy that can also mean poison, land on pharmacon. The possibility F shows me, though, how little feels like mine. My chest beneath the pressing stones. A pride event where people call me Little F, so quickly lose my name. The rock soon disappears me. Each horror movie archives a resistance. The autopsy of Jane Doe shows how a body won't be dominated. Skull split, drained, and still won't open. Her hex's pride mortician skin. I study and take notes. Is this dysphoria, revolt, or just reaction? My ankles chafe on ducking stool. I stalk beaches, pockets lined with gold and lead. Draw shapes in the sand to summon what's enough. Fix my lipstick, bury men, stretch my spine into the sky. I conjure what I can't contain. Awesome. Then me going to read another one. So sort of throughout the collection, there's this sort of conversation that the speaker has with a couple different monsters that pop up that sort of converse with the speaker. They have sort of interactions with to help them sort of learn about themselves a little bit. So this one is from the perspective of the character of him from Powerpuff Girls. Him is sort of a devilish looking figure with red claw hands, but is also sort of very androgynous, very sort of fabulous, I would say. As a kid, I was very much sort of impressionable to that. So this is update on him from Powerpuff Girls. Of course I fangirled seeing him work at a coffee shop on Wilshire. Can't say I wasn't gawking at this misfit Mephistopheles, this idol of my odd duck childhood. Their pink tulle scrunched beneath a khaki apron, thigh high swapped for tennis shoes. I tried to play it cool in line, but him kept chipping mugs and flipping orders, popped an oat milk carton with their claw. People snickered, mimicked their falsetto walking to the sugar station. Him reminded me of something queer and clumsy that attracted too much notice. A target on two fronts. Reminded me of guessing what the joke's about and making that a game. Him's beard poked through the hairnet that they wore. They shattered someone's lemonade and shards rained on the ground. I wanted to help, fetch oven mitts, but thought this might be patronizing. wanted to repay their showing me to layer crimson, strut maniacally, craft ginger out of points and curves. I feared distracting them. Him spilled espresso in the bar that got on someone's pants. They kept apologizing, same as when I asked my boss to use my new name, and he wouldn't. The sorry added to my hands. I tried to make it easy for them by getting bottled juice. Tried not to stare, made small talk about muffins, which worked until I almost walked off without paying. Him laughed at least. Each time I went back, I hoped to see them there, but never did. I hoped him wasn't fired. I swear I saw them once while backing out my car, a black North Face above an apron, salmon ruffle peeking out. That's enough for me to know, I think. It's enough to know they're there. So something that the collection also sort of contends with is the relationship that horror has with queerness, with transness, with sort of bodies that are deemed as other. There's sort of this conversation that happens a lot within horror films. Is we can find sort of things that are very problematic and representations of folks who are different, but then we can also find things that are empowering. So I think a lot about that in the book, and a lot of poems sort of deal with that. So this is um, looking at one specific example from a movie from the 80s called Sleepaway Camp, which is a slasher film where sort of the big sort of reveal is that someone's not the assigned gender that they were at birth, or they do not live the way that they were assigned. And that's this horrifying, terrible thing that happens in the context of the book, the context of the movie. So this is at the midnight show of Sleepaway Camp. My queers and I clear from the aisles, annoyed and damning the director, entering full takedown mode. A trans girl romps through teens' dark cabins, the panicked cry of "she's a boy" to give this slasher its shock twist. Today, the image we're all killers remains deadly, has only grown more mainstream. But others in our group push back, defend the film. All huddled at a Denny's, we listen to them fawn over the catharsis in a murder fest. Admit over plates of fries to dreams of wasting bullies, dropping angry beehives on the assholes throwing slurs. From the ruckus of debate between our booths, the film's subversion sharpens. Critiques of gendered violence, forced dysphoria emerge. Can't we hold both readings of the movie to be true? No, there's risk at our vindictive core, but that it offers a resistance that we might carry on with movie talks and diner talks, the uneventful plot of it, an arrow pointed at the next abuser's throat. Can't we promise to slay whoever creeps these woods and return after to the quiet trees? So, I always pick the poems I want to read, and then I'm up here and start to question them. But yeah, the collection obviously, has this focus on horror, but also sort of goes in some other directions a little bit. Focuses on some things that are happy, some things that are joyful. So I'll read one of those poems. In addition to being a really big fan of horror films, I'm also obsessed with the band ABBA. Big ABBA head. Will constantly defend Mamma Mia to the end as a film. So this is a poem called When Meryl Streep Sings Dancing Queen in Mamma Mia. When Meryl Streep sings Dancing Queen in Mamma Mia, village women flock down to the island's shore in streams of swirling skirts, tossed kerchiefs and aprons taken by the breeze. And all of it's timed perfectly to swelling synths crescendo. I picture the women in my family here, women in my family scoring parts in the showstopper and crammed into panning shots so audiences spot them. Each skips in spite of stiffened knees, tosses up her stove-marked hands. Each of them is owed that joy. Because women in my family grin bright enough to outshine Meryl, so much that she hands lead off to my mother, stands back while she basks in the Aegean teal. Here my mother isn't sick, has no injection to time out. Here every aunt and grandma radiates a disco glow that burns away the years, the too small house, the loneliness, the shoulder aches from decades cutting hair. House dresses swapped for sequin tops, bell bottoms flared to block out X's, rheumatism, thirst for drink. I feel a frisian tingle when hearing them croon when you get the chance, knowing it's not sighed at husbands asked to run one more errand. Rather, it's a promise to the water, right? The woman across the waves, take off, keep on twirling. Each one so full of light, each happy time for we'll hop on back to the monsters a little bit. This is called Portrait as Werewolf. Tucked behind the backwood in a borrowed car, we grip the doors, pass silver coins between our mouths. I wear a new white dress and flower crown, rhinestones beaded to my snout. Plush a thing for you and hope to graduate from myth. Watch me strip the want from bones. Lovely beast, my trying wolves to beauty. What's a monster but a body deemed impossible, the glossy fur and pale thighs quivering at your touch? As a child, I felt this bite sink in and tried stopping it. For years, tongued bullets, cracked enamel kept on gurgling a dead name, kept this body graceless. But one can only stifle howling for so long, deny entry to their lair. Here woods blaze with murk light, spark a gleam across your claw, and offer prey. I lick my lips. I kiss the moon. It took so long to get here. So, yeah, so I will do more. Does anyone know what an anti-joke is or heard of an anti-joke? I learned about it somewhat a couple years back, yes. It's basically a joke that isn't funny. Um, but that's what's funny about it. So this is one that I heard on a date once. So this is called Ode to an Anti-Joke. When I love myself again, I'll smell of jasmine strong enough to turn heads on the street. When I love myself again, this girl won't dance through smoke, her gown won't chafe my skin. I've tried to douse in glitter and be churchlight, sway hips like angels do. I've held boys with bombed lips. In turn, I've earned a bloody mouth. I've torn acrylics off in back seats, felt the knife eyes at the laundry, folding skirts. At what point is a body just a bivouac? There's a joke about what's similar between an airplane and a grape I heard once on a date. The punchline being that they both have wings, except the grape. If I love myself again, I'll tell this bit to everyone who cannot help but laugh at something so unfunny. In those moments, I'll stop thinking the thing I am not, and instead just watch teeth glint inside of smiles. Let's see. Feeling that it's summer, like beach poems are very appropriate. So I'll do another beach poem. So I live in Los Angeles. I'm from Los Angeles, but moved away to go to grad school for a while in Arkansas. So grew up by the beach. I was a big beach kid, and that was definitely one of the hardest things about moving. So this is called Since Moving from the Beach. Since moving from the beach, what I miss most are boys who'd rip their skateboards past me on the strand, eyes bright as new bearings, warm with gloam. Miss boys who'd swerve from tourist stop dead center, dodge the sandy dogs off leashes, jump crushed vape pods, how they reached warp speed despite all that tried to stop them. And this is the boy with red wine hair and Texas Chainsaw Calf tattoo I watched almost do a kickflip, who biffed the landing and cracked his phone, who seemed happy being a spectacle, who seemed to part his lips the instant you passed and indict me in his mouth, who in that instant let me live. I miss how longing starts inside an instant and lives forever as a memory. I miss boys making scenes the way I never could, who make me think I could someday. Boys not offering their hearts, but giving them and moving on. Who call that living? Life that I want to. On to one more. Now. So yeah, I was in Arkansas for several years and was there at a very sort of interesting time for a political moment, just in that it was sort of the beginning of the next chapter that we've been in where of sort of anti-trans legislation, sort of targeting healthcare for youth. Um, the first spring I was there was 2021, which was sort of when Arkansas gained the infamy of being the first state to pass a healthcare ban for trans youth. Um, being the spring, it was also just sort of a very physically beautiful time with flowers and everything sort of coming to bloom. So sort of that juxtaposition was odd to mentally get around, but also very hopeful in some ways. That sort of was inspiring in that way. So this is Arkansas bans healthcare for trans youth. Ozark flowers coat the roadside with the quiet bloom of blue and violet. The yellow bursts find room between the grasses, grab at rays of falling light. I look out driving home and ponder how, despite rain and grazing deer, resilience lives. Their denial of removal. Blossoms last till morning. Bring a smile. Show me how much I need stems cracking slabs of concrete. Spring struck life. Parked, I pick scabs off my arm and picture our survival. How flowers here resemble folks so beautiful they cannot help but dance alone in quiet rooms. Who sway together, knit a field nobody else can scythe. Night swells, but we don't stop taking shafts of deserved sun. We hold our brilliance in dim hours. Thank y'all.
Thank you, CD. That was so beautiful. And I love hearing the poems in your voice. I've been reading and rereading your book. And so I'm like, okay, this is my voice reading them. And now that I can hear them in your voice, I will not forget that. So next time I read them, I'm gonna hear your voice in my head, which is great.
Oh, thank you.
And ABBA, yes. There was an LP in my grandmother's house, ABBA and Air Supply, and I would just switch them over and over. I was this weird kid just listening to all
I
this.
love that.
So, one of the things that jumps at you when you read Scream Queen is horror films, right? And how they are sort of weaved throughout the collection. And horror films are messy, they're gory, they're bloody. But there's always this distance, right? We have the screen. So there's a distance between what we're watching and us, kind of processing all of that. Um, but writing is different, right? Because language can be devastating despite being a construct. Language is abstract, but at the same time, we are talking about all these legislations that, the wording of it is actually having devastating consequences for people, right? And I think about the lines in during Intro to Film Theory, which is such a great poem. And the speaker says, and I quote, these bills that flood state houses, banning bodies, stripping coverage, cutting lifelines for trans youth, while how little others talk about the gore. And so there's this contrast between all this violence on screen that is actually, attracting people. We want to watch this, we want to see it. And yet, these other things that are happening and that are also affecting people don't have the same effect. And so, what happens when, and I'm quoting one of your lines, so much language is hunting ground, so much harm silenced, so much cruelty made quiet. So, do you think that by languaging queerness or queering language, however you want to put it, and challenging what is considered the norm, it's possible to work towards new possibilities and a vision for like a new world or a new reality? And how?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that question. And yeah, those moments, because yeah, something I think very recently, I know at least for me, and I'm sure for a lot of other poets in particular, we're sort of at this moment where we're seeing how, as folks are sort of, invested in the possibilities of language, like what language can do, it had seen as sort of this creative medium. We're also at a time where we see how destructive it can be, how it sort of it is a tool. It can be used in these ways that are sort of, creative or destructive. It decides who is and isn't a person, or like who is and isn't worthy of certain rights, and ways in which rules are applied in uneven ways. And I think for me, writing this book, with that in the background, with sort of like this sort of legislative mindset in particular in the background, writing into queerness or queering language and queering writing that way was sort of a way of speaking back to that, or trying to reclaim language as a force that can show us what's possible rather than what's restricted or what's defined in sort of this very sort of narrow prescriptive way. um so yeah, like as I was writing these, and also just sort of like the ways that the forms work in the poem, and also like the sort of the way that phrasing or syntax works, poetry was cathartic in that sense, because it allowed for this idea that, it's the ability to sort of express these ideas or these desires about like what my body can mean, or the speaker's body can mean, or these monsters' bodies can mean, but also like how it's said, and like how we can do that in these ways that are, typically non-standard, or seen as sort of unusual, with like slashes and spacing and all of that. But it's like that's reaching for something. It's allowing for space. It's allowing for us to think and feel these things that are, sometimes they don't feel like they're capable of being expressed in words, but the words are sort of signaling something approximate to that. So yeah, like I think it's this sort of antidote or a way that we can sort of work through the moment we're in right now.
Yeah, I love that you used the word antidote and also the talking about the slashes, right? Even in the title and the word slasher that we use for this movies, right? And so, sort of like cutting through the binaries and, creating some kind of rupture that is also like a new beginning. I love that. It's great. So I know this might sound odd, but I read these poems as love poems. Love poems to self, to family, to the larger queer and trans community, but also to the monsters, both real and, fictional. Love is fluid, like identity, and while the poems also speak of violence and harm, both through actions and language, they offer new ways to see film characters that have been portrayed as monsters, in the most negative of ways. And I always think about the wolf from Little Red Riding Hood and how many poems there have been written about the wolf from the wolf's perspective, persona poems, which you also do in your book. Um, and so monsters can also be beloved, beloved characters. Actually, sometimes they're even more interesting than the good characters. And I love that those lines that you read, what is a monster but a body deemed impossible? Um, and so I don't think you're trying to revindicate the characters, but rather reframe or reveal something different about them. Um, how do we learn to love our monsters? How did you or do you love your monsters? And can they be the catalyst for transformation?
Yeah, no, yeah, it's a wonderful poem. Yeah, I love your example of Little Red Riding Hood. Yeah, because like even yeah, these particular stories that were sort of told from a young age, or even just sort of been around for centuries, even the sort of the ways that we sort of are ingrained or sort of taught these particular ideas of like what is and isn't a monster, and sort of socially that's sort of the function of them as a as a storytelling tool. As I My fun little trivia for the book is about monsters is that the word monster comes from a Latin word that means to demonstrate. So when something's demonstrative, it's coming from the same word as a monster. So in that sense, monsters are supposed to show us things. They're supposed to reveal something about the society we live in, what isn't valued, or like what sort of behavior is appropriate in that sense. Um, and yeah, like going off of the poems reading about sleepaway camp is like I think when we're given these sort of these depictions of what isn't a monster, and we see ourselves in that, it's sort of obviously it makes us feel ostracized, makes us feel othered, but it's also at what point can we learn to sort of reframe that, reclaim monstrosity in a way that's empowering. So a lot of time and effort on my part, yeah, went into sort of learning to love those monsters, to seeing like, these things about myself or other people or people I care about that are deemed monstrous are not that. It's from a particular vantage point, a particular camera angle or perspective. And I think part of that comes in also learning to do that work as a poet of like speculating a bit, leaning into, yeah, creating these persona poems of, from the perspective of the werewolf or the vampire or Frankenstein monster, where it's like, if we let those monsters speak, if we let them sort of live in a way that is different, but maybe more authentic to how they seem to have wanted to live their life, we can maybe not see them as like, these sort of ghoulish creatures, but they are people and fully realized with thoughts and desires. Yeah, so I think a lot of loving on is comes from sort of that persona work, from that sort of imagination, speculation. It's also very fun to like think of like what some of these like creatures from movies would do. So I just encourage that for everybody, whether a horror fan or not.
Yeah, that's actually a great prompt to work on. Just like taking a character and letting go and see what happens. I'm thinking about the Aneli Antigua, the poet. I think she lives in New Hampshire, and her book Good Monster, and how, that tension between, are monsters made or are they born? And it's a little bit of both, right? Because like something that happened to you can turn you into a monster, and then it's your, choice whether you want to be the monster or not, and what kind of monster do you want to be? And so that when you were talking about, the way these monsters have been portrayed, I was going back to that, some of her poems too, and Frankenstein and other well-known monsters from film and literature. Um, and so thinking about that, the monster, I'm also thinking about the prefix trans, right? Which, can be used for so many of the words in the book, but also, yeah, we use it all the time. Transformation, all these words that contain it, right? And trans in Latin is a way to get across, to transform or change. So, as a writer, but also as a human, what changed for you when you wrote this book? And I'm thinking about the lines, can we abandon what we've made ourselves? And there is ecstasy in this undoing, a body filling out its bones, becoming. So speaking a little bit of change for you, in whatever way, wherever you want to take it.
Yeah, no, yeah, I love the sort of fixation on the prefix. It's yeah, this idea of transformation, transcending sort of this idea of movement or change or something. What like was something else I kept in mind a lot, like for the structure of the book, even is keeping the book sort of in the sense of it feels like it's sort of moving towards a particular point, or just like the point of allowing the speaker in the book to sort of continuously feel change is possible, that they can sort of keep having this relationship to themselves that allows for different desires to be articulated, allows for sort of just like freedom and possibility. For myself, I think, yeah, like I definitely think like the act of writing the book, of sort of creating the book, going through the whole process of the book, even now sort of having the book in the world, definitely for myself was transformative for a lot of reasons. Like I think obviously, like the idea of, articulating a desire, just articulating sort of like also like a, the hope for a world that is different than the one now sort of, commits yourself to, an aspiration or a dream and sort of makes it, feel a little bit more possible or a little bit more like you can find the way to be that person or see that happen. So for me, in a lot of ways, like writing the book was sort of a way of sort of committing myself to wanting this mindset or wanting this idea that there can be violence and hatred, but there's also these things that are lovely and beautiful about, having this body that is identified in so many different ways. Um, yeah, and I think that was something that really kind of helped the book find its structure is to see it as this thing that's living and see it as this thing that's sort of encapsulating a mindset or a mentality that sort of allowed its form to come in a lot of different come out in a way I feel like it felt a little bit more organic as as my mindset changed as the book was being written over the years or as I sort of evolved as a person. I went back and sort of thought about things a little differently. Moved poems got moved around. So I guess we both kind of worked on each other. The book changed me, I changed the book in response to the changes that had happened, and we sort of symbiotically came to where we are today. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, because it is a relationship between you and your book. And you kind of feed off of each other, but you also give each other space. Sometimes you need it. It's like being in a relationship and just, trying to figure out how do I work around this or how do
Yeah,
I
that was, and I'm curious from your perspective too, with your book as well. But yeah, like you have that weird point, I think, when you're sending it out or it's getting edited or anything, where you sort of you go back and forth between liking it and you have a lot of like resentment or hate, you don't
Yes.
hate the book, but you have this sort of anchor at it, and then eventually at some point, like as it actually came back, I feel like I had gotten closer to it by the time it came out into the world. I was like, no, I understand you better than I did like 3 or 4 months ago when I was, in the edits or in that. So yeah, I guess I was if you felt the same way, but
Yeah, definitely. And especially as you start getting rejected, you you keep thinking, maybe this is not what I should be writing about, or maybe I should revise it. Maybe I should pull it out. All these doubts start sort of like jumping at you. But also, I think having conversations with people, doing readings, and the editing process, it helped me understand my book better because when you're in it, you know what you're doing, you're immersed, you have your themes and your obsessions, but then someone else points something out at you that maybe you hadn't seen in the same way, and then it kind of clicks for you. And so I really love that because I feel like a book is a communal project, even though, you know, you're the one writing the book, but you have maybe friends looking at your poems, maybe workshops, maybe then the editors and then the readers and it becomes something else. It becomes a monster, in a way.
it does. Yeah, yeah. Like it becomes very much like yeah, kind of like Frankenstein. Yeah, like it's sort of this thing where yeah, like the interpretations of other folks sort of yeah are
Mhm.
stitched together in this really interesting way. Because yeah, like I learned so much about the book from other people, which is always really fascinating. Yeah, because yeah, as you were saying, like you learn that, and it's like oh yeah, like I didn't know it was doing that. Cool.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm curious, like now that we're talking about process, like what are some sort of craft techniques that you went to or that seemed more helpful to you as you were trying to give shape to all these poems and make it into, a whole. Um, did you do a lot of, generating and then revision, or was it like, okay, I'm going to do the whole thing and then I'm going to go poem by poem and revise? Like, how was your process? How much research did you do? Did you give yourself any prompts?
Yeah, no, 'cause I always find that's really fascinating to hear from other folks as well. Yeah, for I'm a big prompt person, and that like I like the structure and sort of the container of sort of constraint of like, I'm really big about like I'll time myself when I'm writing. I feel like it sort of allows me to generate better. I like prompts where I use, like I give myself 5 or 6 words to use, and sort of, the poem kind of finds itself in between those sort of keywords, and then, at some point maybe the words go away. Um, but for me, with a lot of this, I liked to. give myself particular forms to write towards.
Mhm.
So I would, potentially like start the draft of a piece, as a sonnet or as a particular sort of like poetic form or, like particular shape or particular length. And then sort of in the revision process, that would go away. It was sort of, I would
Mhm.
create these sort of somewhat arbitrary containers and then sort of work backwards from that is sort of let the poem find its shape from that point. But I'm also a sort of, I know a lot of people who are really they love the part of drafting better, but I think revision's my favorite part. So like that was where I feel like the book was really written, was in the revision process of allowing sort of these interventions to happen. It's like, I might have written this like as a sonnet, so like 14 lines, but now I'm finding like it would work better with 12 lines, but like it just needed that initial step to get there. Um, so yeah, like I guess for me, the biggest thing I found was like sort of taking all of the sort of like pressure of getting something out of the way, like just putting something there and then working from it and allowing like the major work to happen in drafts. With the book, yeah, like another big prompt sort of that was really helpful was these sort of persona approaches and sort of allowing myself these more sort of speculative poems to come out as um, having such a themed book about monsterhood or about sort of like what it means to have a body is, yeah, like these sort of reimagining. There's a poem from the perspective of the headless horseman. So like, oh, what does that mean? How does language change with that sort of container? But then there's also a poem from the perspective of Medusa's head. So like, sort of like inverted in that sense of like, what does it mean to be a head or what does it mean to be headless? So like those were really generative to me as sort of, picking up these particular monsters that I liked. I picked those ones in particular because as sort of like a monster nerd, I was like, I really like these. And then I found out, oh no, these actually lend themselves to like really interesting sorts of like uses of language or like sort of concepts about like the body or queerness. Um, yeah, and then I guess from the research standpoint, um, it was interesting. Like I definitely, was a big fan of these movies before, but then sort of as throughout the process, the research was really helpful. I would go down these like sort of weird Wikipedia rabbit holes about like really obscure movies, and sort of learning like the context of how they were created. Sort of film theory became sort of a touchstone as well as like the idea of like, there's a lot of to your point, the question you asked earlier about the idea of like sort of the separation between
Mhm.
like the audience and the film. There's all the stuff about like the gaze and sort of like identification that sort of found its way into some of these poems as well, because a lot of that is very gendered, very sort of like coded through the lens of patriarchy, and that became a very interesting sort of like perspective for the book as well. So all of that sort of very monster specific, but I would say that the biggest thing I learned and would recommend for folks writing their books is, yeah, like sort of allow yourself to follow those passions or go down those sort of research rabbit holes with poems. And I think, especially with poems, I think we sort of a lot of the time think of poems as these sort of enclosed or like internal things, but no, like this research is very helpful. It sort of takes the project in different ways. You can explore these different avenues. So, prompts, time yourself when you write, and look at Wikipedia a lot.
Yes. Those Wikipedia rabbit holes are something else.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like you learn so much like as a poet and like thinking about like how something's constructed and like how something is made. I think for me at least, particularly like horror films, like just how sort of the weird stories behind them has been something that was very helpful for again taking the pressure off the book as well, just because this idea that like you can watch this thing and it's like, oh, it's really effective or it's scary, but then you like learn like, oh, like they filmed it for like $2,000 in someone's basement and like they didn't know what they were doing, the script wasn't done, and then you're like, oh well, if that could look that way, maybe this poem isn't so bad.
Right. I can do this.
Yeah, I can do this. If they can, yeah, shoot this movie with like a camcorder or an iPhone and it's scary, I can write a poem that's good.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I don't know. Are there any questions from the audience? Or Tyler, I don't know if you have questions too.
We do have one question from the audience. Emrys asks, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the reveal at the intersection of transness and monstrosity as at the end of Sleepaway Camp and similar movies. Silence of the Lambs, maybe? So, your thoughts on the reveal at the intersection of transness and monstrosity?
Yeah, no, I think that is a really interesting question. Yeah, for like, for thinking about like horror, always sort of this idea of like reveal or revelation of the monster, of things like that. Same, I feel like it also has sort of a connection to poems as well. This idea of when we think about like the volta in a poem, where there's this moment when like a poem shifts or sort of has that moment of revelation also, which that reminds me of as well. And then it seems like the third sort of piece of that is also there's this intersection of within trans there's these moments of like so-called like trans panic where there's sort of this understanding of who uh, this understanding by a particular person of who a particular person is, thinking about the scene in Sleepaway Camp when they're like, oh, this person was assigned a different gender, is like that is sort of a moment of discourse. um yeah, I guess with all those sort of strands in mind, i think I think poems in our conversation earlier, talking about like space and things like that, space as sort of like a way of allowing for possibility. I think a lot of the poems in Scream and Cream try to think about that idea of the reveal in a way that sort of questions it a little bit, because yeah, there are these sort of, I think, initial from the lens that the question came from, like these sort of questions about like fetishizing or sort of like sensationalizing, like oh my God, and those go back to the gaze. So I think for me, the way I'm understanding it and wanting to answer this question, I guess, is yeah, like there's sort of this idea of like how to fetishize, knowledge or revelation in poems, in horror, that I think in my book I'm trying to like question a little bit, trying to like push back on like what a poem can reveal something, tell us something about ourselves. It doesn't have to do so in this way that is sort of like shock value. Oh my God. And yeah, also allowing for trans folks to sort of live as more than sort of shock value points for a film, if that makes sense. I like that question. Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone who's here? Feel free to put them in the chat or use the Q&A. Just give it a second here. And thank you so much, Emrys, for that question.
Yes, and there is a Silence of the Lambs poem in the book. So if you're curious about that, yeah.
Great. Um, well, CD, maybe you could close us out with the final poem. And I'm going to share the link again here with everyone. Anyone who's not gotten a copy of the book, you can get it anywhere books are sold, but we'd love it if you picked it up from Ampersand Books. That's the indie bookstore of writers and books, and every sale through Ampersand helps support our nonprofit work. So thank you so much. And CD, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Please click click the link, buy your copy that way. And yeah, thank you, Layla, for the really wonderful conversation. I'm gonna end us with one of the poems you had mentioned. It's called During Intro to Film Theory. During Intro to Film Theory, I learned practical effects lend authenticity to horror, heighten audience immersion. That death is a deceptive angle and manipulated prop. Take Glenn's demise in A Nightmare on Elm Street. His body swallowed by a bed and returned as Geyser Rouge. Filmed upside down, the killing defies logic, so he cannot look away. An alien, a bursting creature, makes such easy work of ribs. To shoot a rubber torso was packed with meat. It's ironic an illusion employed slaughter. There's so much harm silenced, so much cruelty made quiet. These bills that flood state houses, spanning bodies, stripping coverage, cutting lifelines for trans youth, while how little others talk about the gore. Each day presents a jump scare, hoping it might bury us, though this violence started long before. What angle could I film from to grip an audience and capture all the care inequities? Without red dye, full shrug. stay unfazed by our loss. I chafe against a want for what is owed. A movie in soft focus with warm colors, perfect lighting, every scream queen flagrant with her brilliant smile. Not simply new ending, an entirely new script. Thank you all.